Hi, friend.
Hi, friend.
And to the brave hearts listening out there, welcome to Permission to be Human. I'm Andrea.
And I'm Janelle.
Get ready for some real-time relationship woo and wisdom
from the front lines with occasional tantrums and tears
about how breaking rules, blurring boundaries, and tossing tradition can be catalysts for finding your truth.
Let's debunk the fairy tales we were told as children and create a new map for life.
Yes, Disney can go fuck itself.
If you're seeking permission to choose your own path,
freedom is the new F word, people,
and want to feel less alone along the way,
we got you. Please note, this is our side of the story. Our partners and metamors have their own individual experiences, and we do not speak for them. Hi, friend.
Hi, Andrea. All right, here we are today. So I have a funny story to share with you in line with what we're talking about today, which has to do with asking for what we want. And I feel that my ear is really heightened to it now after coming from my weekend workshop about the Wheel of Consent with Betty Martin, which is what this whole episode is about. But really, the Wheel of Consent at its core is learning how to ask for what you want. Or another way to say that is it's the art of receiving.
Okay, and so you're talking about the art of receiving and asking for what we want in the bedroom or in life?
In life and in the bedroom. But I really see this framework as a foundation for how to live my life more clearly, more easily, more directly.
With less noise.
With less noise. And yeah, that's one of my takeaways was realizing, and I think this could be a feature of being an external processor, right? Is that sometimes I'm processing to figure out what it is that I want. But in doing so, people can be really confused if I've actually asked a question at the end of me saying a lot of words.
Or held a boundary or given an answer, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so I want to hear your example, and then I'm already thinking of examples in my life.
I'll share an example of me hearing what this is like. So I was talking to an Airbnb host. I'm going someplace next month, and I asked for a late checkout. And we ended up having a conversation over the phone, and the person said a lot of things and spoke for like 3 minutes. And at the end of that time, I was like, I heard this and I heard this, but I'm having to infer and try to make sense about really what you're saying. And in the end, I said to him, I think what I'm hearing you say is that me asking for a late checkout is complicated and difficult for you. And if you were moving towards ease, having a firm boundary of there is no late checkout would be the best option. And he was like, yeah.
It was like a translation.
It was a translation. But he was like, but I don't want you to feel blah, blah, blah. And I was like, and I realized I was like, oh, like the ding, 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 ding in my head was all of the words that he was using was he wanted me to feel like I was important and that my needs and my desires were valid, and he wanted to try to meet them as much as he could. But in doing so, it was a very unclear boundary on his part. And what I was able to say to him was, I'm actually totally fine to know that there is no option for a late checkout, as long as you tell me there's no option for a late checkout. And then it's just really clear. Like I don't feel affronted by that. But it was this recognition that he was trying to account for my feelings and so couldn't ask a direct question.
Yeah, I really see that. That's a pretty mundane, administrative conversation that you're going to have a lot in life, which to me translates to my husband saying, hey, can you pick up our daughter today? And I'm saying, well, I have this meeting until 3:30 and then I have to run to Trader Joe's and then I'm picking up my friend. And, so I go into all of this basically telling him it's really complicated and I don't want to do it, but I don't want to disappoint you. And I'm so sorry because this is making it hard for you. And really what I should say is like, no, I can't do that.
Oh, it's even hard to say that. Right.
That is just like a basic That is a conversation I have many times a week. Okay, so today we're going to talk about the wheel of consent. And what I'd like to know, Janelle, is how you heard about the wheel of consent, why you went to the workshop, and just a basic definition of it.
Well, first I want to say this is a framework, the art of receiving and giving, that was created by Betty Martin. She is, I would say, in her late 70s now. She was the one who's running this workshop with a co-facilitator. And it's something that she came up with in the last, 25 years after working a lot with practitioners, where she was working a lot with clients in a context where they were having to ask for what they wanted, and she realized they didn't know how to do that.
Let's just say that again. She was working with clients who didn't know how to ask for what they wanted.
Yes.
Anyone out there have trouble asking for what they want? Just curious. Ever had trouble? Whether you're talking to your child or your partner or your mother-in-law or the clerk at the grocery store. Are you having trouble asking for what you want?
Right. And so some people think consent, it's a matter of like yes or no, but it's actually in the definition of in which she's using it, it's much more nuanced than that, because it really is about these desires and asking for them.
Okay. How did you first hear about the wheel of consent?
I heard about it at my very first ISTA, level 1. It's one of the tools that they teach.
Okay. And what was your impression of it then? Did you like it? How did you use it? Were you open to it?
When I first heard about it, it was mind-blowing. What the wheel of consent talks about is that you could think of it as two halves, right? If people are receiving, someone's receiving, then someone is giving. And in our culture, as a woman, the idea of being in the giving or the serving quadrant is very comfortable for a lot of us. And you could think of that as like, oh, I'm giving you a massage, for example. Oh, I'm giving you a ride to the airport. And I feel very comfortable in that role as someone who likes to be helpful to others. But learning in this ISTA workshop that I was in, that oftentimes I would say, I would like to give you a massage. So thinking I'm in this giving role, but actually I was wanting to give you a massage because I wanted to have the pleasure for myself of touching your body.
Okay. So this feels like a nuanced way to think about giving and receiving.
Yes. A nuanced way, or just a way. I don't think that I've been taught about giving and receiving before. These are just my own assumptions. This is my first time actually learning a concept about what does giving and receiving actually mean.
Just before we go any further, can you tell me the 4 quadrants of the wheel of consent? I want to just start planting these seeds because, to be honest, the first time I heard about it, it was totally confusing. I didn't get it. There was so much ISTA content that was just something that actually didn't get in very far. So I had to review it again a year later and became reacquainted. But even when they were doing it and working it out, there was confusion like, wait, am I giving? Am I receiving? What are the 4 quadrants?
So Bravehearts, think of a wheel. And I'm going to actually break it into 2 halves. The right half of the wheel is receiving. The left half of the wheel is giving. And now the top half of the wheel are people who are the doers, they're doing. And the bottom half of the wheel are people who are having things done to. I also just want to name, this is not the most effective way to communicate this information. So everything we're talking about, if you go to the schoolofconsent.org, there are visuals about everything I'm talking about. There's free videos. So you can listen to this whole podcast. So within that wheel, there are 4 quadrants. There is the taking quadrant, the accepting quadrant, the allowing, and the serving.
Okay, can you say that one more time?
Taking, accepting, allowing, and serving.
Okay, thank you. That's just a good place to start.
So I've been practicing this wheel for 2 years. What it has helped me do is be much more clear about what it is I want and the energy of which I'm asking for it. Like, is it for me or is it for you? And this, as Andrea said, like, this is a nuanced way of thinking about giving and receiving. But in every interaction, every day, there's an exchange of giving and receiving. And so why this has been so impactful for me is because it's impacted every relationship and almost every interaction that I've had in any moment.
That's crazy. That's so much. It's just such a huge shift. Okay. You also talked about like how this affects your body, like when you practice the wheel of consent. Can you just speak to that a bit?
This part was actually something I learned this past weekend. This was a 5-day workshop that I was at that was a deep dive into this framework. And I recognized that actually, I'm still practicing it. I just learned this, obviously, but it did change the nuance, like, of the flavor of what it was. Because I recognized, I'm asking this for me. And so I should be in a comfortable place where my tendency was to almost like ask for the other person. An example, I was in one of the work like exercises. I didn't get into a comfortable position. Instead, I was sat straight up, closed my eyes, and I was thinking, okay, what is it that I want from this other person? And what I actually decided was that, I want to look at her ring. So I asked for that. And then I leaned over and like looked at her ring. And what she said to me was, is there a way your body could be more comfortable? And I said, oh, yes. And then when I put my body in a more comfortable position, which was lying down, and then I asked myself what I wanted something totally different.
Interesting. That's quite a contrast. Okay. So what I'm hearing is that the body
is giving me information.
Yes.
Yes.
Just like the body keeps the score. What is that book? So the body is your source. The body is where you're tapping from. Mm-hmm. This is where you need to ask your question, ask your request, express your desire. Okay. Interesting. So do you want to talk about the 3-minute game?
Yes. Because I think if you know nothing else, if you could take nothing else out of this podcast, is there's a really simple, like, you don't have to understand the theory, you don't have to understand the concepts, but there's this game, again, also on the website schoolofconsent.org. And this is a game about giving and receiving. And there's 2 simple questions. You play it with a partner, and one person asks a question, how would you like me to touch you for 3 minutes? And I suggest when you're starting out, right, obviously that could be a wide open question, is to start out with just using the area of your body from your hand to your elbow. And when you're asking that question, right, then that other person gets to like think about it and respond. And you do that for 3 minutes. The next question you ask is, how would you like to touch me for 3 minutes? Same hand to elbow. And then you switch. And then your partner goes and asks you the same 2 questions. And that's the entire game. So I was playing this game with a lover, and we got to one of the questions, and he literally went like, turned over, fell down on the bed, and hit his face.
Did you ask him, how would you like me to touch you for 3 minutes? What did you ask him?
I asked him how he wanted to touch me.
Okay. And then he hid and kind of freaked out.
Ultimately, what that means is he had to feel comfortable with his own desires and asking for them versus just doing what he normally does and is very comfortable with, which is doing what I wanted. But I was asking him what he wanted, and I was offering my body as that. What that showed me was that he was much more comfortable putting me first instead of himself first in any situation.
And he was uncomfortable tapping into his own desires out loud.
And that is not uncommon. The response to, I would like to take for my pleasure something from you, requires trusting the other person knows their own boundaries, knows their yeses and nos, and that in our culture, we are not taught that it's okay to do that, whether you're a man or a woman, because if you're not in consent, AKA you're not getting permission to do that, then you're outside of the integrity of that. And that's where like perpetrators and abusers and like a lot of ickiness can happen. So all of us are afraid of being perceived as outside of consent in that particular quadrant.
Okay. What comes to mind for me when you talk about him curling up and not wanting to talk about it is fear of rejection. And what I'm thinking immediately is that rejection is easier when I touch your knee and you shake it off, right? And I feel that. I'm like, oh, she doesn't want me to touch her knee. But if I said, I want to touch your knee, and you said, no, I don't want you to do that, that feels worse.
It does?
I mean, I don't know. To me, it sort of does. Yeah, there's something more explicit. I'm looking at you. We're actually connecting. There's a more specific and concrete rejection there. Even though I think I could get used to it being opposite, right? It's like, I'd rather just know, like, do you want me to touch your knee or not? But there is something about like, oh, I don't have to look at you while I'm touching your knee. And if you just shake it off, I'm like, okay, she doesn't like her knee touched. And so there's something so explicit that we're not that comfortable with in society. It's just like someone texting you and saying, if you want to go out to dinner, and if I have to say no to it for any reason, I'm just like, oh, I'll go ahead and do that tomorrow because I'm rejecting them. It doesn't feel good to reject them, and it doesn't feel good to be rejected.
Right. So I agree with everything you're saying, except that I think, so touching someone without asking them first, right, could also be perceived as creepy and weird. And so in my experience with lovers and different people is that oftentimes instead they just don't do anything. They don't ask, but they also don't touch. And so then they're just frozen in the not wanting. Like they just, it's not okay to want at all.
Yeah, that happens too.
There's an unending number of why not to ask for what we want. And they're really valid reasons.
Yeah. Right? Yeah. I related to a lot of these.
Right. So there's the fear, as you said, like there's a fear of the no, or there's also a fear of the yes.
What if she says yes, then I have to do that?
Right. Like I said I wanted it, but do I really want it? I don't know.
Yeah, true. Right? Okay.
There's the perception that you're too much. There's the perception that you're not enough. That if you ask for what you want, then you're going to owe something to somebody. That you don't trust the other's limits. You don't trust their yes or their no. You're not worthy of asking. That you just don't even know what you want. That what you want is shameful and shame comes up.
And that if you do that, it's almost like there could be an owing, and that could be touching or unloading the dishwasher, right? Some kind of owing.
Absolutely. Yeah. That in asking for what I want, that I'm afraid of the impact of the reaction from the other person. That I might be misunderstood or laughed at for asking for what I wanted. That actually wanting, like my want isn't as important as someone else's want.
Or that it won't match their want. That it's not like they're not the right vibe. They're not, oh, they're going to think now I'm this way and that's not true. This isn't representative of me.
And then sometimes even like you don't want to ask for what you want because if you get it, then there's a grief that can come up about, oh my gosh, I just got what I wanted. And now I'm thinking about all the times I didn't ask for what I wanted. And so many valid reasons in our culture not to ask for what we want.
And there was one more I wanted to add to that was past patterns and dynamics. So if you've been with someone a long time, you know, I have a friend who recently has said, oh, well, in my past marriage, I only asked for what I wanted when I knew I would get it. So interesting. And she's like, if I wasn't sure if I would get it, I wouldn't ask. And so that has created a pattern for her in her current life now with anything. She's just like, no, I don't ask unless I know it's a sure thing. So she's having to crawl out of that pattern to say, oh, it's okay to ask even if I don't get it.
Yes. Right. And that's like the fear, like just asking for the sake of asking is valid, right? And like having to know that, oh, it doesn't mean you're going to get it, but the accomplishment is in the asking.
Yes. And so this also reminds me of One of my good friends, it was probably 10, 20 years ago, we were reflecting upon picky eaters in restaurants and, the When Harry Met Sally scene where she's asking for the chef salad and the apple pie a la mode. And she goes in this long diatribe about exactly what she wants. And what the important lesson I learned was that it is always okay to ask as long as I am not attached to the outcome. So when we're in a restaurant setting and I say, can I have extra sour cream on the side? And could you make my burger medium rare? And could I have my drink with no ice? I'm not being picky. I'm just asking for what I want. But the only problem comes is if the waiter says, no, I'm sorry, we can't do that. And I'm like, ugh, I don't want to be that person. But it's okay to ask for what I want. It's okay to be specific.
And when you're not there yet, like, so you know that it's okay. You might know it's okay to ask for what you want, but you still don't, right? And so then what are you doing instead of just asking, right? So it's possible that you're making a suggestion. If they want it, if I can convince them to want it, then I don't have to ask for it.
Oh, yeah. Good idea. Yeah, I've done that.
Or resentment builds, right? Like, I'm not asking for what I want, but I'm resenting the fact that I'm not getting it.
Because you should be able to read my mind anyway.
I might whine, and I loved this, WHINE, complain, or I might just drink wine.
What do you mean?
Like, I'm not getting what I want, so I'm just going to numb out by drinking wine. A desire is a desire, and it's going to express. It either can express in a consensual, healthy way by asking explicitly, or it's still going to come out, but in a not consensual or not healthy way, right? Like, oh, I'm not asking for what I want, so I'm going to drink too much every night. I'm going to numb out. I'm going to get it somewhere else. I might settle on something that I don't want. I might steal it. I might guilt trip the person by not asking for them not giving it to me. I might withdraw. I might blame. I might think that I'm too much. I might just say, oh, I'm going to want something else instead of that thing that I really want. There's no end to this list.
Yeah, the other one comes to me is just, oh, I'm just going to hope that he gives it to me and reads my mind without me asking for it. And then being annoyed when he doesn't.
Yes.
This totally happens.
Right.
I'm just like, he should know. He should know what I want right now. I mean, come on. We've been together a long time.
So in this way, right, this framework is called the Wheel of Consent, but you can see really that the art of receiving and giving really is what this is about. So we're talking about asking for what I want. There's two questions you can ask. There's one, which is the may I. So may I touch your knee, as you explained, Andrea. In that regard, I am asking for something for me. I am receiving that. The other question I could ask is, will you touch my knee? And in that regard, I am receiving as well. When I'm asking, may I, I'm asking for something from the other person for my pleasure. When I'm asking, will you, I'm asking for them to do something to me for my pleasure.
Got it.
The next thing I want to talk about, right, is if it's hard to ask for what we want and the things that we do instead are not useful, well then, how do we ask for what we want cleanly? The way to fix that is, there's an acronym, NTVC. N equals to notice. And Betty's suggestion is as I said earlier, get into a relaxed position. From that position, feel into what is it that you want. So you're just noticing at that first spot. The next step is to trust your noticing. So we're just going to stick with this example of, can I touch your knee? You went inside yourself and you were in a relaxed position. Like, what am I noticing? Oh, I want to touch Janelle's knee. How do you know that that's it? You're not sure. You're going to trust that that's what you want. And then the next step is to value it, the V. So wanting to touch her knee is a legitimate thing that I deserve. I'm trusting the fact that when I went into my body, that's what came up, that is what's true for me. So it's the notice trust you're noticing, value you're noticing, and then you're communicating you're noticing. In this way, this NTVC, the last step of communicating is what you're doing with the other person. Like you're asking for it externally. The other two steps of trusting and valuing are actually an internal process. It's like a dialogue you're having with yourself.
So what if doubts come up? If you're like, I don't know if I can trust this. I'm not sure if I value it. Then what do you do?
This is where the experiment. This is a practice. This isn't something that we are like learning as a framework and then say, okay, here we're going to go out into the world and we're going to do it. This, in every moment, you have a chance to practice and to experiment. And like any practice, like if you're like, oh, I'm going to meditate for 20 minutes a day, you could do the 3-minute game with your partner once a day. And just in the container of, okay, here's 20 minutes. I'm going to practice noticing. I'm going to practice trusting. I'm going to practice valuing and then communicating. And every day you're going to like learn a little bit more. Like I said, I've been working with this wheel now for 2 years, and it's a lifelong learning.
Yeah. And I realized too that something that you helped me start doing that I've then ended up passing on to other people inadvertently is I ask you a question and you're like, let me take a breath. Let me breathe into that. Right. Coming back to your body, really seeing how it feels. Like it's tempting to take like 10 seconds because that feels right with the rhythm of the conversation and we're all urgent and we have places to go and we're in a hurry. But I did this with a mutual friend of ours the other day, asked her a question. We were in a coffee shop talking and she said, okay, let me think about that. Breathe into it. And she probably took 2 full minutes. And that was fine. I wasn't in a hurry. And it was unexpected because that's what people do in conversations. We don't take that much time to really check in and see what our truth is. And remember that it might be an I don't know. Like you still might not get to the definitive answer of yes or no. And that's okay too. But it's worth the investigation.
Absolutely. And Andrea, this is probably like the most important takeaway, which is to pause. That in any time you're trying to figure out what you want, if someone's asking you or you're trying to do it for yourself, pause and take as much time as you need. And if at the end, the answer is, I don't know, then in the moment, then the answer is essentially a no, right? Because you're not sure yet, but that I don't know is a valid answer. And that taking all the time you need is the most valuable thing you can be doing, even if you don't end up asking for what you want.
Yeah, I hear that. You're honoring yourself first.
Because you're starting with the first step, which is the notice. And so you're noticing, and that's also a skill. So pausing is the key to noticing.
And noticing is a skill. Sometimes I'm like, okay, I'm taking a breath. I'm feeling into it. I'm like, nope, I'm really not in my body. I'm in my head. It's very hard to get out of my head. I'm in a rational space and I'm in a hurried space or a fast energy space. So this is, again, not surprising, just about coming home to yourself and really investigating what you want.
Yeah. I did a kink workshop last week. I haven't even told you about. It was like a demonstration of like these different types of things. And one of them was rope play. So getting tied up, for anyone who knows what shibari is, which is Japanese rope tying. And I have a very, 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 very little experience with this, but I was like raising my hand because I'm like, yay, I love new things. Let me try this. So the person who was doing it, had never met before. So he really needs to trust that I know my body well. And he put my arms behind my back, tied me up, and he's like, okay, how does that feel? And I've never done this before. And like one of my wrists was a little bit like, there was like a sharpness to it of the rope against my skin. And I was like, oh, like in my head, I was like, well, maybe that's how it's supposed to feel. But then I was like, but maybe it's not. And so then I said to him, oh, like I have like a sharpness in one wrist. And he was like, okay, let's adjust it. It's important for you to be comfortable. And I realized, oh, I had all these projections. Like I'm asking to be tied up and to be compressed. So I'm supposed to be uncomfortable, and actually not true. But having my wrist tied behind my back brought up all sorts of different emotions. But the discomfort of the rope against my skin in that moment wasn't the thing I was supposed to be noticing. Like that was a distraction versus presencing me. So then we continued and it was like, okay, how does that feel? And then I'd be like, oh, okay, let me see. Oh, my knee feels a little uncomfortable here, but I think that discomfort feels appropriate. We can continue. And at the end of the interaction, he said he felt so much more trust, even though we were strangers, with me because he could tell, because every time he asked me the question, I would say, let me see. And I would close my eyes and go in and take about 30 seconds. And because I said, oh, I want a correction, I wasn't just like, oh, everything's fine, everything's fine, everything's fine. He had deeper trust in the whole experience for himself. And he was the expert. But it was me being able to listen to my body and then express it that gave him the trust of the experience. Back to your question of how do you know if what I'm noticing is valid, was that I said something and then he affirmed it versus me staying in my head and just being like, having a conversation with myself in my head.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is that there's a discernment, particularly in, let's say, rope play, of, oh, here's the discomfort I like, and here's the discomfort I don't like. That's how I would phrase it for me, because I do like to be crushed sometimes and like held down. And there's something in the discomfort I like. And then, of course, there's a discomfort I don't like.
Yes, I'm not saying I was comfortable every step of the way with what he was doing, but the thing that was uncomfortable that was taking me out of presence, I was like, oh, that's the one that I'm naming. Like what you just said, like you'd like to be crushed. Yeah, that there's discomfort there. But if your pinky's getting crushed and maybe like bent backwards, well, that's not useful.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I've been talking a lot about if you're in the receiving quadrant, like what is it that I want? So I want to just highlight some of the main concepts of if you're in the giving quadrant, the giving half versus the receiving half. So if you are giving, you are doing something for the other person. A key word you can think of is that you are willing to do something for the other person, setting your own desire aside, but also honoring your limits. So for example, I'm willing to take you to the airport, but not if your flight is at midnight. Simple limit. Or I'm willing to have you touch my knee, but not with your nails. Right? Those are two examples of limits. And when I'm in the giving half, I could be doing the action, meaning, how would you like me to touch you? So you could think about this as a massage, right? I'm the masseuse. I am touching you. How would you like me to touch you? That is the serving quadrant. I could also be I could be in the giving half, but having something done to me. How would you like to touch me? That puts me in the allowing quadrant. For the receiving half, this is for me. Another key word there is like, what is it that I want? I'm in the wanting. I have preferences. I have desires. I could be doing, which is the may I question. May I touch your knee for my pleasure? That puts me in the taking quadrant. Or I could be having something done to me. So for example, will you massage me? That puts me in the accepting quadrant. My ahas when I first learned this a couple of years ago was, I wish I had learned this at a much younger age. And obviously in terms of touching, like for your body, for sexual pleasure, that might not be something that you want to be teaching like your young child. But you could be teaching them the concept of, are you doing this for me or are you doing this for you? So for example, if you tell your 13-year-old, okay, will you take out the garbage? They could say, yeah, I'm willing to do that. I'm not wanting to do that. Like I'm willing and that I'm gifting that to you, but I'm not wanting that for myself. So just this simple, are you willing or are you wanting, helps them understand, is it a gift or is it a receiving? Who is it for? So I do believe, and again, back to Betty's website, there are ways that you can extrapolate this to like younger kids by just like really simplifying it and helping them understand who's it for.
Great. Yeah, I love that this applies to all ages, just with different nuances. What about the routes of pleasure, direct versus indirect?
If you have trouble just noticing what it is that you want, there are also valid reasons for that. And so in this sense of understanding what it is that you want to ask for, there's reasons, like you might have a trauma. You might have conditioning around that's not okay.
Yeah, women aren't supposed to like this. Men aren't supposed to like this. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of that cultural conditioning, I think, that happens from an early age.
You don't have the attention. You don't actually have the capacity to like listen to your body. That of itself isn't a skill that you have yet. Or you don't have the capacity in the sense that you can go into a state of overwhelm just thinking about what you want. And in fact, that example that I gave earlier about my friend who like was like, oh my gosh, and like turned over and hit his face, right? He didn't have the capacity to even go in. Again, like rejection, shame, like being out of practice. These are all reasons that make it really challenging to notice what our desires are and to go in and to think about them. And all of those are valid. All of those are okay. But there's to acknowledge that the desire doesn't go away, even if you can't feel it, see it, touch it, understand it.
So it sounds like if you do have a block from trauma, fear of rejection, not knowing what you want, not being able to hold it, that this is a practice you should try on a regular basis, even by yourself, to come back to yourself and say, oh, what am I feeling in this moment? Where do I want to go? What do I want to eat? Who do I want to spend time with?
Yes. And I think it's a practice you can do, whether you can touch into that or not. But the thing I want to convey is that even if you're like blocked in that way, the desire is going to come out, but it's going to come out indirectly instead of you being able to ask for it. So one way is, I don't know what it is that I want, so I am going to want you. My pleasure is going to depend on you knowing your pleasure, or me making you happy, you smiling, and putting it all onto the other person, which is a lot of pressure.
Totally. And I've felt this before, and that is just a terrible, it's really a power dynamic to get into. And I think that even happens, well, I don't want to orgasm until you orgasm. Well, then I'm just pressured to orgasm.
Right.
Even though it does feel like it's coming from a good place, they're holding space for you, but it's just too much pressure. And then I'm in my head and I'm like, oh, I have to do this. Like, so there has, and this is a long time ago, but this is just something that's like, oh, that doesn't work.
Right. So that if you are like, oh, and this is back to this serving quadrant. If you're like, oh, I'm just going to give to someone else and never take for what you want, then actually you become a martyr, you become resentful. So there's downsides to not taking. And so learning how to take, learning how to accept, taking or accepting, AKA learning how to receive, is actually a healthy skill to interacting with others and yourself. And probably the last thing I want to say is that there is pleasure in every quadrant. This isn't about, oh, I'm just going to like learn how to be in serving, or I'm just going to learn how to be in taking. The idea is to learn what it feels like to be in every single quadrant, and to develop the ability to give and to receive.
One more thing, I'm thinking as the receiver, it probably takes quite a bit of practice to only receive, to really relax into that receiving and not be worried about, is the person comfortable? Does she really want to be doing this? Does she like doing this? Is there enough light? Does she have the right tools? Like just all that goes through your head when you're receiving.
Yes.
And I do think that is a place I have gotten to with lovers where I'm like, oh, I can see there's more pleasure coming from this person because they are completely open to receiving. It's a totally different state.
Yes. And it's extraordinarily vulnerable.
It is. That's true.
And so vulnerability is tied to receiving. So being willing to trust yourself, and then being willing to trust that the other person has themselves and that they are in their yes and their no, and they're honoring their limits, all of those things like that, it all comes back to vulnerability.
So our resource, let's just say Betty Martin's books.
Betty Martin has a book called The Art of Receiving and Giving. And the website, theschoolofconsent.org, has a ton of free videos. There is downloads of the Wheel of Consent. There's also a free download of the 3-minute game and explanations of all of this stuff. So even though we tried our best, I tried my best to kind of give you the overall concepts, really the takeaway is that I think this framework is fucking amazing and has changed my life. And I want everyone to know about it.
Yay. Yay. And our Braveheart assignment, I have 2 assignments for you. One is go download the 3-minute game right now. Go download it and print it out and put it on your desk, and you can ignore it for 3 months. And then eventually you can like pick it up and use it. But like, just keep looking at it. The other one is I want you to experiment this week. When someone says, I love you, if someone says, I love you in your life, it can be anyone, your mom, your daughter, your son, your partner. What if you could take a minute to receive that statement and just practice the receiving rather than saying like, I love you too. You know, typically what I would say. Yeah, it's a really good exercise and not something we do enough. There doesn't have to be any touching or any requesting. Just start there with the practice of coming in and receiving.
Or if no one's saying I love you, if you get a compliment in some form or another, just say thank you.
And stop.
And stop. Don't say, oh, and I love your dress too, and this or whatever.
And I got it at Target and da-da-da. Yeah.
Just say a compliment comes in. Thank you.
Ooh, I'm going to try that today for this week.
Okay. Thanks, Bravehearts, for listening. We love you.
Bye. Do you need permission to be human? You got it.
Listen, subscribe, and review on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Learn more about us at permissiontobehuman.live.